I think Hulk knew that going to WWF was going to be a risk because people forget. And again, I don't want to compare territories. I wasn't there at the time. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about in terms of money and all that. But what I have heard over the years is that Verne's territory, the AWA, was the one that everybody really wanted to work in. It wasn't a weekly territory, so you weren't on the road quite as much. And Verne, historically, even though he was accused of not being fair with a lot of people, paid more than just about anybody else. So you could work the AWA territory, make as much or more money than you could work in any of the other territories, and not be on the road quite as much. So leaving that comfort, and AWA was a very successful promotion at the time, financially and every other way. It was one of the top territories from a revenue perspective. And leaving that was a risk. And Hulk knew that. But he believed in himself. Now, sometimes he believed in himself more than maybe he should have in any given moment, but he believed in himself, and he believed in the power of the Hulk Hogan brand and what it could be. Ironically, because now we're talking back in whatever it was, 80s, early 80s, and Hulk saw the value of the Hulk Hogan trademark in the merchandise. And he wasn't willing to give it up, where most guys would have given it up. Oh, it's t-shirt sales. I'll make it up over here, right, with the payoffs. But it was a line in the sand for Terry, and he believed in himself, and he made a decision.
You know, Steve Taylor, who had been doing photos for Vince and for Verne, back-channeled a message to Hulk Hogan saying that Vince wanted to meet with you. And Vince said, you know, here's the plan. And the result is you'll be the first professional wrestler to ever earn $1 million in a single year here in America. Well, that was music to Hogan's ears. Hogan had been obviously estranged from the WWF after he decided to go work on the Rocky movie against Vince's father's wishes. And he had found a home in Japan and in the AWA. But allegedly, according to the rumor and innuendo, Verne was not cutting Hulk in on the Hulk merchandise. So Hogan, after he has this new meeting and sort of promise of $1 million a year from Vince McMahon, he no-shows the sold-out Christmas night show. Well, that's all the commitment that Vince needed to see. So the very next night in Madison Square Garden, he had Bob Backlund drop the world title to the Iron Sheik. And the very following day, so the 27th, at Wrestling at the Chase in St. Louis, is where we see Hulk Hogan return to the WWF, this time as a babyface, wearing the yellow. He's got a headband on. He's coming out to the Rocky theme, Eye of the Tiger. And we know in less than a month, he's going to be the world champion. He's going to beat the Iron Sheik, that damn dirty Iron Sheik, right there in Madison Square Garden. An iconic photo, an iconic moment in wrestling history. January 24th, 1984. It's clear very quickly after this that Vince is trying to make a play to go completely national. There's lots of rumor and innuendo that he wanted, Hulk to win the AWA title, and maybe Vince was allegedly trying to bribe Harley Race to have Hogan beat Harley Race for the NWA title. Vince is full steam ahead with a national plan. And I know you're not yet in the business necessarily, but you're around it and you're a fan of it and you're keeping up with it. Did you have the type of relationship with your dad where back then or in the years since, you could have asked him about what he felt about Vince sort of, breaking the party lines, if you will, of the understanding and the agreement that all these territory promoters had all these years? What did your dad think about going against the grain and going out on his own to go national?
When he went national, I got to just, my earliest, and we'll kind of progress through here if you want, but my earliest ones were, folks, as my old man would say, we have to stay focused on putting out a TV, and we got great relationships. And truth be known, we kept Wave TV in Louisville and all the different, stayed focused on that. And so we're going to do what we do, and they're going to do what they do. So them running in that first kind of loop, we've talked about the Great American Bash in Memphis and how bad that bombed, and WWE, their first kind of loop in the Tennessee area when they were doing pretty big business other places, didn't do so hot. And so my old man always wanted to stay focused. Now this, you're asking about when Vince decided to go national, what was my dad's thoughts? To my knowledge, he just said, hey, we need to focus on what we're doing and let them focus on what they're doing.
You know, people say, well, he screwed Vern around. I mean, you know, I always like to say none of these guys would have left if the conditions would have been better. So Vince Jr. offered something better. And I wish somebody asked me the other day, do I think the same thing would have happened with Vern's territory? I don't think Vern would ever accepted the entertainment aspect of Hogan. And without that entertainment part of Hogan, I think he would have just been another big monster talent out there. So I don't think the same result would ever happen anywhere else except somebody that was willing to accept the entertainment aspect of Terry Bollea.
John, I want to ask you, you know, when we're talking about Vern, I guess the story is out there that for years and years, it's been repeated that Vern was selling Hulkamania t-shirts and Hulk Hogan merchandise, but wasn't giving Hulk Hogan his fair cut. And maybe that's the reason there were some upset feelings. He wasn't being cut in on the merch. But allegedly, Vince had a meeting with Hulk Hogan and said he wanted to make him the first wrestler to make $1 million a year. And that was music to a young Terry Bollea's ears, and he was off to the races. Had you heard that merchandise story before?
I'd heard it, and I don't know if it's true. And I don't want to throw shade on Vern Gagne. You know, Greg's a good friend of me and Mr. Brisco's both, and I don't know what actually happened. I do know, at least from what I've gathered from everything, was that Vern, like Mr. Brisco said, was not going to have a big showman be his champion. You know, he wanted to have a more of a shooter or more of what he considered legitimate based wrestler, rather than a guy who's just going to sell out every arena you put his name on, which seems kind of crazy, but that's how a lot of these old promoters were. You know, they wanted these, what they would consider legitimate wrestlers. You know, that's one of the reasons, you know, Dusty had some issues, as Mr. Brisco has said on our podcast several times, getting booked when he was NWA champion, because people didn't like the look. Even though he's going to sell more tickets than anybody else they have in that territory, there were guys who didn't like the look of Dusty when he was NWA champion, and they didn't want to book him, you know. And so this was just Vern being really old school, being an old shooter that would rather have a Dean Dutton than a Hulk Hogan, you know. And the matter of drawing more money, they weren't going to give in on their principles, and you know, that's Vern's prerogative. I disagree with it, but hey, he, you know, Vern's a legend.